I guess we're going to start, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the woo. Woo! Get back there. Sorry. So we're here to announce the launch of this new book called Now Jazz Now, which is a book that came into fruition about 6 years ago. The music writer Byron, Coley, who lives in the USA, you've probably seen his byline in Wire magazine. He always he writes the Size Matters column, you know, about the more sort of marginalized 7 inches and cassettes and whatnot. Byron's somebody I've known since the early '80s. He's a scholar of just outsider music. He's a musicologist, and he's one of the most formidable music writers of the last 40 years, coming out of the whole generation of the '70s with Richard Meltzer and Lester Bangs and such. And he's really a son of that. And he was the force behind Forced Exposure magazine with Jimmy Johnson that really sort of covered a lot of the more sort of disparate and avant-garde aspects of what was happening in independent music. And so Byron and I sort of got really interested in trying to find all the documents of what was happening in free improvisation and free jazz on record and cassette at a time that predated the internet. So it was always a bit of a situation where our information came from the far reaches of certain magazines and, across Europe and across the USA, just talking to some of the musicians who partook in making these records, whether it was Derek Bailey or Evan Parker or John Zorn, you know, just trying to sort of get a grasp on, you know, the wealth of records that were made that were just not in record stores. I mean, you would never really see them. You would see them in second-hand bins for the most part, and you would try to guess if they were kind of any value or if they even had any testament to free improvisation or free jazz. But we kind of we took it upon to teach ourselves like what these connections were, and realizing a lot of these records were communiques. They were like missives from different countries to each other, from people who had dedicated themselves to the vocation of playing free improvised music, and as well as just being free jazz purveyors. So the most fascinating thing is how they were artist labels. They were art labels that were just all about the artists themselves taking matters into their own hands and dealing with record production and sending their recordings of free improvised music from, say, Italy to France to England. So you had Incas in England talking to Ictus in Italy, talking to the labels that were in America and France and the labels in Holland. And every scene had their own sort of cultural personality, and it was kind of an interesting sort of world of just like this music that was really sort of a subgenre of not only jazz but just like art music. It made sort of independent rock music or punk rock music look kind of almost, you know, capitalist and commercial compared to what was going on with these labels. And so that really fascinated us. And so we really got heavy into like, you know, finding complete runs of like the music that was on the BYG Actuel label coming out of Paris at the time, and that sort of took it upon itself to record these expatriate free jazz musicians who came over from the USA and found actually more welcoming ears and hearts here in France and across Europe. So, you know, about 6 years ago, we had this discussion, like, you know, now that we've kind of conquered this this record collecting, you know, obsession, it would be really wonderful to sort of like let's do a compendium of these records. And we knew that it was unwieldy because there was thousands of them that we thought had like this kind of equal value in the history of the music, coming from, you know, from the late 50s into now. And so we kind of drew parameters for ourselves. Let's start when it really starts happening in like, you know, in 1960, and then let's stop in 1980. As soon as the word digital comes into the lexicon, we stop. It's like that's the end. And and then also into the 80s, it just becomes really, it sort of blows into informing so much more of what it is itself as music. So that's about it. And, you know, the book, we really wanted to make a book of just like 100 records. And so we had maybe 2,500 records. And so we had discussions on the telephone mostly, and email about which records we were going to talk about and feature, and which ones were the most important records that we thought were essential to the morphing of this music. There were certain records that, you know, we knew were important. Say, like William Hooker did a record in the 1970s, a double album that was like really somewhat essential, but we didn't. It fell to the wayside. So there's a lot of contenders that are not in the book. I actually wrote an article in the 90s in the Beastie Boys Grand Royal magazine called The Top 10 of Free Jazz. And Byron Coley, the other writer at the time, got really angry at me because he said, now you let the cat out of the bag. Everybody knows about this and they're going to mark all the records so they're too expensive for anybody to buy, which is kind of the case. But, you know, there was very little literature in contemporary writing at the time. There was a lot of academic writing about it that you could find. But mostly it was from the early 70s. So there wasn't too much. There was a few magazines that would certainly write about it. Option magazine or OP magazine. And I tried to find as many magazines as I could that sort of pertained to free jazz and free improvisation as I was touring across Europe all through the 90s into the 2000s, and amassing an archive of these as well. And just sort of, and that's where you would find most of the photographs of free jazz. And so at one point we were wondering if we should have more of a photographic element in the book. And most of the great photographers who captured a lot of what was going on, especially in the world of free jazz, were here in Paris. And one photographer that we thought had really strong work was Philippe Gras, who's no longer with us, but his wife Suang Gras, who's maybe here, I don't know. Hello! And so I communicated with Suang by email. I said, we would really like to use your husband's work. And so there's half a dozen photographs in there. Especially astounding is the cover photograph of Don Cherry playing in the Louvre in 1968, I believe. It's wonderful. And it's a very solemn photograph. You know, the idea of like free jazz and free improvisation always lends to this aspect of it being this kind of loud and cantankerous and unhinged music, whereas in some we really wanted to sort of also talk about just the meditational and somber qualities of this music, as well as it being free, as this idea of freedom. What I'd like to do is read my introduction from the book. If I had can I have a copy of yours? I'll take it. Thank you. If you don't mind me reading, it's just very short. I know we were going to talk a little bit, but I guess maybe I don't know. And then, so I'll read this, and then Alex Ward from London, who's a free improviser of great note. He and I will do a duo of playing some free music for you on this very free night. So this is the book, as you've seen all over the store. And you know, thank you to Souffle Continu. It's like Cimer. It's like for about French hip hop speak. I would thank you so much for having us launch this book, because we haven't. It just came out. We just saw this 2 days ago. My co-editor Eva and myself. So this is like new to us, and we've been working on it, like I said, for about 6 years. You know, really making sure that it was as happening as it could be. And it's basically a pictorial of the records. They're all, you know, we were very, very we were very geek, nerd, anal record collector vibe, where it had to be the very first pressing, regardless of its condition. Most of them came from Mats Gustafsson's archive. So when Byron and I started talking about this, the idea of bringing Mats Gustafsson, a celebrated saxophonist, into the mix is that he is the most hardcore free jazz, free improvised music record collector that I know on the planet Earth. And so he had to be part of this dialogue, this trialogue, as it were. And so we had these discussions where we would get in lots of arguments about which records would be in this book of 100. And there's about 2,500 contenders. We were thinking of publishing online all the other contenders. That, it's just because they all have deserved value. It's chronological, so it does go from. We have these precursors that open the book. It's like Sun Ra's very first 7-inch into discussing Mary Lou Williams, the pianist, and how she was introducing, and Lenny Tristano, how they were introducing these ideas of a totally free music into the idiom that is jazz. And certainly Mingus's 10-inch strings and keys from the early 50s. That's 1951. We even have a Stan Kenton record in here, but we actually sort of back it up with Why You Do.
I hope so.
And there's a lot of these records have been reissued. You can find them on CD. You can find great reissues of them with extra tracks and some great liner notes. Some of them no. Some of them. There's one record in here where there's only one extant copy that exists, and we don't know who owns it. But it's a very important record just because of what is going on with the record. And Mats has heard it, and he said, it's an incredibly important record to talk about. And that's this. It's an acetate by Eric Dolphy and Ron Carter. And as far as I know, the music has been issued on these Eric Dolphy compilations. You can hear it. But this actual acetate, somebody has this. We don't know quite sure who has it. But so to actually get a visual of it was very difficult. I will read something, and then we'll play, and thank you everybody for coming and being here. My introduction is right next to this wonderful photo of Philippe Gras of June Tyson of the Sun Ra Orchestra. And there's also some writing by Neneh Cherry. You know Neneh Cherry, the stepdaughter of Don Cherry, has a wonderful piece in here about growing up in the household of Don and Milky Cherry and being surrounded by records. So the book is all about records. I mean, it's about music and it's about the musicians, but it's really about the records, like these documents that carry the sound. And so we wanted to make sure that that's what's going on here. Free jazz may be seen essentially as a genre term identifying a united cry for liberation. A statement announcing an intellectual and celebratory emotion, a heraldic deliberation in sound and fury. Free jazz in all aspects has become recognized, rightfully and righteously, as a sonic synonym of radicalized awareness. The primary factor, function, and foment of the music, a maelstrom of art, spirit, and revolution, resonates as an unshackling of rules and regulations, a stripping of strictures and expectations defined by standardized technique and language. Free jazz developed as a cultural challenge, a necessary reclamation of the music's African authorship, a collective fist in the air in direct action and resistance to the perpetual disenfranchisement and historical racism perpetrated upon African identity. Taking its essence from the living lineage of traditional jazz, breaking it up, down, and out, and employing varying methods of free improvisation and spontaneous creative interplay, both sophisticated and primal, free jazz would become as soon as it was experienced, one of the most critically polarizing means of creative expression of the late 20th century. And to this day, one of the most timeless and influential. Albert Ayler, Sun Ra, Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, Carlo Bley, Don Cherry, Patty Waters, Peter Brotzman, Han Bennick, Evan Parker, Derek Bailey, Maggie Nichols, John Zorn, all visionaries who found the inherent value of free jazz and free improvisation elemental to work that could be in the practice of magic and beauty and beyond categorization. Music that would reflect love, pain, glory, joy, and anger, all in a dance of fire, and as serious as the lives devoted to its spiritual science. This book focuses on the recorded documents of free jazz from the period of the first forays coming out of modernism and the avant-garde to the eventual opening of the gates where punk rock, punk funk, and Afro-punk, industrial and noise music, along with all aspects of multi-literal, lateral, ethnic, cosmic diversity, continue to exist in resistance to the demagoguery of injustice. There you go.